Hello, my name is Kevin Hallgren, and I'm going to present some research that was conducted along with Teresa Moyers, looking at readiness to change and its associations with in-session motivational language. One way of conceptualizing client motivation is through the trans-theoretical model, which hypothesizes that there are 5 stages of change that represent different levels of readiness to change. Pre-contemplation, which is associated with not having considered that change is an option or something that should be done. Contemplation, where a client is exploring their ambivalence or their pros and cons about changing. The preparation stage, where a client is preparing to make actual behavior changes. The action stage, where a client actually makes those behavioral changes. And the maintenance stage, where a client is maintaining those behavioral gains they've already put in place. Another way of conceptualizing client motivation for change is through the assessment of change talk, which is language that's expressed in sessions that favors change. The counterpart to change talk is sustained talk, which is language expressed in session that favors not changing. Increasing change talk over the course of treatments has been hypothesized to be an active ingredient in motivational interviewing, not just merely a reflection of pre-existing motivation that already existed. Change talk can vary in quality and in quantity. Quantitatively, we can look at change talk by asking how much change talk or sustained talk is offered within a treatment session. And qualitatively, we can look at what type of change talk clients are offering. That is, are they offering preparatory language, which would be statements that explore ambivalence, such as pros and cons about changing, or is change talk expressing more commitment and action language, such as statements that express actual commitment to change or steps that a client has already taken to make change a part of their life. Guided by the trans-theoretical model, we hypothesized that the trans-theoretical model stages of change would be associated with different levels of change talk. Specifically, we thought that the pre-contemplation stage of change would be associated with less change talk and more sustained talk. We also thought that the contemplation stage of change would be associated with more preparatory change talk that explores ambivalence and pros and cons about changing. And we thought that the action and maintenance stages of change would be associated with more commitment language and taking steps language. To evaluate this hypothesis, we did a secondary analysis of data from Project Match. Specifically, we looked at 69 outpatients and 48 aftercare patients, and we reviewed the audio tapes from first sessions of motivational enhancement therapy from Project Match, and we coded the language to identify the quantity and quality of change talk. Paper and pencil measures included the Eureka, which has 4 subscales, one representing pre-contemplation, one for contemplation, one for action, and one for maintenance. Another measure we looked at was the Socrates, which has 3 subscales representing recognition, which is kind of the inverse of pre-contemplation, ambivalence, which is similar to contemplation, and taking steps, which is similar to action and maintenance. We assessed change talk by reviewing audio recordings from first sessions of motivational enhancement therapy, which were coded by trained research assistants using the scope. The overall percentages of change talk, sustained talk, and the type of change talk were used in the subsequent analyses. The scope has several broad classes for classifying change talk, and that fits into preparatory, commitment, action language, or other change talk. Preparatory language has subscales such as desire language, which would be something like, I want to stop drinking. Ability language, which would be something like, I'm able to stop drinking. Reason language, such as, not drinking will be good for my health. Or need language, such as, I must stop drinking. Another broad class of change talk language is commitment and action language, which could be in the form of a commitment, such as I'm going to stop drinking today, or in the form of steps already taken, such as I started going to AA meetings. And other change talk is something that does express motivation for change, but doesn't fit clearly into any of these other categories, such as I want to get the most out of treatment. Our analytic plan was fairly simple. We looked at correlations between self-reported motivation and change in sustained talk. Again, the hypotheses that we proposed are rephrased here, which we'll go over in just a second, and more thorough analyses are reported in the full paper, which is referenced at the end of this presentation. The results from our first hypothesis are presented in the table below. Our first hypothesis stated that we believed pre-contemplation would be associated with less change talk and more sustained talk. The results are presented here as a full correlation table, but the attention should be drawn to the rows that are in orange, which correspond with this specific hypothesis. As you can see for the aftercare sample, for the Socrates recognition scale, higher recognition is associated with more total change talk, And that is consistent with the hypothesis we have here, because remember that Socrates' recognition is inversely related to pre-contemplation. And we see the same correlation for total sustained talk, where for the aftercare population, the Socrates recognition scale was negatively correlated with total sustained talk. However, this finding doesn't replicate for aftercare patients with the Socrates measure, nor does it replicate for outpatients or aftercare patients for the Eureka pre-contemplation measure. The results from our second hypothesis are reported here. Our second hypothesis stated that the pre-contemplation stage would be associated with more preparatory change talk. Here we see one significant correlation where for the Socrates ambivalence scale, outpatients who were higher on the ambivalence scale had less reasoned change talk, which is actually in the opposite direction of what our hypotheses stated. All other correlations were non-significant, and this significant correlation was not replicated within the aftercare sample for the same measure, nor was it replicated for either sample with the Eureka measure. Finally, the results from our third hypothesis are reported here. Our third hypothesis stated that action and maintenance stages of change would be associated with more commitment and more taking steps change talk. The rose and orange show that for the taking steps language with the Socrates taking steps measure, that was consistent with our hypotheses. Those who were higher in taking steps on the Socrates reported more taking steps language, but that was only true for the aftercare group and did not replicate for the outpatient group. Nor did it replicate for the Eureka measures of action or maintenance, and none of the correlations for the commitment language were significant with any of these measures. In conclusion, we actually found no consistent associations between self-reported motivation and total change talk, total sustained talk, or the type of change talk or sustained talk that was offered in first sessions of motivational enhancement therapy. That means that in-session motivational language, at least as it's measured by the scope, is unlikely to be reliably predicted by self-reported motivation based on paper and pencil measures. Because we didn't see any consistent associations with change talk and self-reported motivation, it's unlikely that change talk is simply an index of pre-existing motivation for change, which would mean that change talk is just an inert marker rather than something that's actively influenced by clinicians. Previous research has shown that change talk is influenced by therapist behaviors, such as the asking of evocative questions or provision of reflections of change talk, and we believe that change talk may subsequently have an effect on outcomes, and this has been shown through correlational studies previously as well. Readiness to change and in-session language likely reflect different constructs that are related to each other but are different aspects of motivation for changing. Motivation for change is likely to be a multifaceted construct that can't be collapsed into one-dimensional measures. More research is warranted to understand how these aspects of motivation may overlap and influence one another. If change talk and self-reported motivation by paper and pencil questionnaires reflect different aspects of motivation, then we should continuously monitor our clients within treatment sessions and continuously alter our treatment plans based on this information that our clients are telling us directly. We shouldn't solely rely on questionnaire reports of readiness for change in order to make clinical decisions, but rather continuously monitor what our clients are saying and respond accordingly to provide the best outcome. For more information, you can consult the paper that was published here. The reference is provided there. And thank you to the Team Elicit, which is pictured in this photo, as well as NIDA, NIAAA, and to our participants.